Good evening. You are about to meet some of the people in my memoirs writing class, which has really just begun, but they're going to read you some of their beginning pieces because it's writing, and it's not sacred writing. It's just writing about their lives. What we've done is we've taken some themes. Mother. There will be father and relatives, mentors, the home they grew up in, the home that they valued much or found the most interesting, things of that sort. So it will differ depending on what they liked to read to you. And if you are ever interested, check us out. There are about seven in the writing class, and I think we're having a good time. So to start off, I'm going to read mine, one, which is about a mentor in my life. And no one else may decide to read about their mentor, but this is one that's fully formed. It's called My Intellectual Mother. At mid-century, Margaret Mead was the most famous anthropologist in the world. Her interests were child-rearing, adolescence, sex roles, and cultural change. She wrote and spoke about these in 37 books, 1,397 articles, and 43 tapes and films. Besides her field research in the South Seas, she had a speaking schedule that shuttled her from India to Russia to South America. I wanted to be just like Margaret Mead, to have the same kind of brilliant career, although I hoped to skip the malaria she caught. What I didn't understand was that to do what she did, I'd have to put my whole life on the line. I'd have to be exceptionally courageous, not just adventurous, and absolutely convinced that what I wanted was more important than anything anyone else wanted. At age 24, she went by herself to Samoa to study primitive tribes, sharing their huts and their stories. Later, she did field research with her husbands, and she didn't seem to have many qualms when she played musical beds, leaving one for another and then another. Mead has said that all her marriages were successes as long as they lasted. My marriage, a continuum of many marriages, sometimes successful, sometimes not, lasted for 60 years. I could call it my Samoa. She had one child, Mary Catherine Bateson, who is now about my age and an anthropologist like her mother, although not as famous. No other anthropologist was as famous. I would have liked being Margaret Mead's daughter. And this even includes the times when she would be leaving me with surrogate parents, sociologists at Columbia University, as she went off to study the natives. Mary Catherine has written that her unusual childhood was happy, and I believe her. I even believe she didn't mind when her mother never was able to she didn't mind when her mother said goodbye and didn't look back. But the trouble is, I would never have been able to do that to my sons. They were my New Guinea. Born in 1901, she grew up in an extraordinary family. Her father was a professor at the Wharton School of Business. Her mother worked on a doctorate in sociology for the University of Chicago and wrote articles for encyclopedias. Margaret's college-educated grandmother was her private tutor until she was 11 and taught her inductive and deductive reasoning as well as how to do research assignments. For instance, young Margaret was expected to take notes on the behavior of her two younger siblings. The whole family didn't just live, wrapped in unreflected tradition, the way my family did. Her family studied themselves, reflecting on their reflections. What a way to educate a world-class anthropologist. What a head start. It was as if two generations were aiming all their intellectual energy into this exceptional firstborn child. I could also say that the family dynamic took its toll later when Margaret Mead's younger sister committed suicide. But that would not be fair. Families can produce more than one outstanding offspring, and it's up to every sibling to learn that family comparisons are especially odious. Mead had her problems as a woman academic. There, at least, I find we had something in common. Both of us were in the world of higher education when prejudices could be spoken openly. The men in charge didn't want women on the staff or in the advanced programs, and they could tell you flat out. Mead was not asked to join the faculty at Columbia University until her late 40s. By then, she was such a star, she didn't need to take on heavy teaching responsibilities, and so she refused the offer. She stayed in her little tower at the Museum of Natural History and came and went as she pleased. It's hard to believe now, but I did not have even one female professor in all the years I went to college. Not one flesh and blood woman I could see in action, talk to, and ask how she did it. I think if you were to ask women's social sciences of my generation, who most influenced them, many would respond, Margaret Mead, from afar. Besides her 3 marriages, Mead had numerous heterosexual affairs into her 60s and a few important lesbian relationships as well. Sometimes everything was going on at once. Such a high sex drive is not uncommon among hard-driving, charismatic people, whether they are male or female. Mead didn't have time for feeling guilty. There were no nervous breakdowns, suicide attempts, or trips to the psychoanalyst for her. We are talking here about someone with a strong ego, a sense that she belonged to herself. On this count, I recognize I'm no Margaret Mead. She had a big mind and could speak well about anything, making it all crystal clear. In 1960, she visited the University of Notre Dame for a conference on natural law. Of course, I went to see her and shake her hand. At 59, she was a personage. The curly hair set atop her plain, square face, cape swirling to the floor, forked walking stick propped next to her chair. She showed slides of her return visit to New Guinea and discussed how the tribes had broadened their definition of brotherhood. During the question period, a professor asked her something complicated involving the ideas of St. Thomas Aquinas. Oh no, I thought. She's not Catholic. She'll come up blank. But never fear, my Margaret Mead talked smoothly and brilliantly about Aquinas and a few other scholastics as well, dovetailing it all into New Guinea. Did I mention she was known to have total recall? People who know her said she was a remarkable speaker in private, too, that her magnetic words held listeners in a kind of erotic embrace. The national oracle could also entrance her dinner partners. Lurking inside me is an oracular self who would be glad to use up all the oxygen in this room if I let her out. But I think I'd rather not. I think that I would rather not be erotic, and I would simply use up all the oxygen and be insufferable. However, from my years as a professor with a pulpit all my own, I understand the heady feeling when you are the esteemed center of attention. It takes great self-discipline to counter this and develop a persona that does not need to perform, who could be a listener. But of course, that kind of teacher couldn't be Mead, who was made for a mass audience. And Mead understood this neediness of hers. Whenever she felt a bit low, she'd schedule a speaking engagement. Streams of people visited Mead in the hospital when she was dying of pancreatic cancer at age 77. This most rational of women even had a faith healer there with her, and of course was planning to write a book about it. Imagine all the hustle and bustle, talking with friends, petitioning, old lovers, planning yet another trip to New Guinea, writing recommendations, arbitrating feuds. That was some kind of grand finale. Only Mary Catherine, her daughter, was not there. Mead had ordered her to go back to her research in Iran and not to look back. So that was Margaret Mead, pioneer in her field, trailblazer for women, advice giver to the nation, and a bossy, tough customer to boot. There was no one quite like her, and I salute this extraordinary woman. I also salute the aspiring young woman I once was, who, though lacking Mead's background, brain power, health, and fortitude, nevertheless gave it all a good try.
Hi, I'm Ann Keel, and this is a memoir about my mother. And this is the first chapter. The book is going to be a flashback, so it starts with Mother's death, and then it's like a reel that rolls back over again, and it starts with my beginning with my mother, my relationship with her. So this is called Follyfield Beach. I started having heart palpitations a few weeks after Mother died, so my cardiologist suggested that I take a break from my job. I didn't have to think about where I would go, so I packed my bags and headed to Hilton Head Island, South Carolina, as my family had held their reunions there for many years. It was a cold day in early March when I left my home in Northern Virginia, but as I drove further south, spring awoke, touching the gray woods with color. Palm trees blossomed at the side of the road, and catkins dangled down like the brushstrokes of Cézanne. By the time I reached my destination, dusk had fallen. As I opened the door of my Toyota, I breathed in the salt sea air. Home, I thought. Home at last. Home with Mother. Then I opened the townhouse I had rented from my cousin Paul, ate some warmed-over tacos I had brought at a nearby Mexican grocery store, and went to bed. In the morning I saw that spring was already deeply installed. Forsythia shed its yellow stars in nearby gardens, and jonquils quivered in the wind. My artist antenna shot up when a heron stepped into a pond behind the house. I hadn't brought my brushes along, but now I longed to paint. After breakfast, with the first rays of sunlight picking their way through the pine boughs overhead and acorns popping under my feet, I headed down the path that led to Folly Field Beach. Around a bend, the Atlantic Ocean spread out in front of me, the tide retreating in a slow recessional of evenly spaced waves. I'd seen beaches like this all my life, both in reality and dreams. They stretched back into my childhood and into my mother's as well. Ever since she died, I'd felt her spirit moving everywhere, over the waters or drifting above the clouds. The footprints I saw ahead of me might have been hers. Rainbow pools squeezed up around the balls of her feet. Seagulls flapped aside to let her pass. She was gone. She was there. She was that white speck of spindrift blown off a wave. Then she appeared in full, picked up an ordinary shell, arched her wrist to examine it before tossing it back in the sea. I looked down at those storm-tossed shells, more mindful of them because of her. Mother favored the exotic ones, but for those poor specimens I saw that day, she barely lifted an eyebrow. They were common shells, broken by Atlantic storms, their plain, bleached surfaces, nothing like the spotted or striped ones she brought back from the west coast of Africa. Even the shells she picked up later in life, the paper-thin ones, ribbed like Brussels lace, the ones she found on Sanibel Island, outclassed the ones I saw that day. I have a fondness for ordinary shells myself, the older ones that are caked together with the smaller ones. They tell a story of how each generation clings to the backs of the ones that went before. But these families of shells, so ungainly, didn't much appeal to Mother. I think she had a sculptor's eye rather than a painter's one like mine. When she died, she left behind a bust of her Stewart Godwin. She had worked that piece out of the smooth African clay when she and my father lived in Accra. My brother has it today, while I have kept her African batiks. We may never know what became of her tapes of the talking drums. My heart began to speed up again like the beat of a talking drum, so I found a seat on a piece of driftwood half buried in the sand. As I did, Mother appeared again, her nose peeping out from under the brim of a small scalloped hat. She was dressed in a crisp blue poplin blouse, her linen slacks rolled up to her knees. In the crook of her arm she carried a wicker basket. My father, an older ghost, gone these many years, walked slightly ahead of her, already melting into the haze on the horizon. I stood and brushed the sand off the seat of my pants and followed her again. As I did, her face began to evolve, her thin nose twisting slightly to the right, the way it did after her accident. It had happened in Ghana when the driver forgot to put the brake on the car, so when she stepped out, the car rolled back, breaking the bridge of her nose. What used to be a straight patrician nose healed badly, and after that had a bump in the middle and a slight twist to the right. It makes me look like a prize fighter, Mother said. This older ghost, undaunted by her broken nose, still seeking some exquisite prize, head bowed, ever hopeful, her long feet bathed in the waves, limped slightly now, the result of a broken kneecap. She was a cast-off shell herself, broken by Atlantic storms, but a shell that still seemed precious to me. In the afternoon, I drove to another part of the island, to my cousin's house. Jan, Paul's wife, had invited me over to watch a tape of their daughter, Hallie, getting married. We had wanted to invite you to the wedding, Jan said, leading me up to the second floor, but Jonathan and Hallie grew up on the island, and they'd invited far too many friends. I stopped to get my breath at the top of the stairs. I could see Skull Creek through the window, moving through stalks of winter cane. On the lawn, not far away, several kayaks lay upside down. Does anyone use the kayaks anymore? I asked Jan. Yes, she said. Paul does. He paddles out into the inland waterway through an opening in Skull Creek. He can only do it when the tide is high. Otherwise, he gets stuck on the sandbar. As we entered the TV room, Jan sat me down on a sofa, saying, I only plan to take you through the highlights. Otherwise, we'll be here all afternoon. When Jan fiddled around with the videotape, moving it back and forth with a remote control, a golden retriever, who up until then had lain sleeping in a corner, yawned and stood up. With a lopsided grin, he paddled across the floor, his tail knocking a copy of Tidewater Parental Living off the coffee table. Meeting no resistance, he heaved himself up on the sofa, then started to lick my face. Deacon, called Jan, get down. Deacon cocked one eyebrow, but didn't budge. Oh, that's all right, I said. I like dogs. Whenever you want to, Jan said, you can just push him off. I didn't want to yet, even though the dog probably weighed 100 pounds. To tell the truth, I liked the warmth his body gave off as he pressed down on my legs. One of my hands had gotten stuck under his chest as he moved across them, and I could feel the thumping of his heart. In the meantime, Jen had found the place on the tape she had been searching for, and I could now see my cousin Paul, his genial face flushed and smiling as he greeted his guests in the church's foyer. Charney, Paul's son, for once wearing a suit rather than a tea-dyed rainbow T-shirt, stood out among the other guests because of his bleached hair. Two of my cousins, Paul's brother and sister, Bill and Suzanne, were milling around the foyer too, also greeting guests, while the tow-haired children played peekaboo through their legs. Suzanne's partner, Kay, her old college roommate, was there as well, a part of the family now. Finally, Jan herself appeared on the screen, matronly and sweet, wearing a brown silk suit with a large orchid corsage trembling on her lapel. Next, the groom walked in, accompanied by a number of his West Point classmates. They were handsome men, tall and tan, looking very formal in their blue dress uniforms. Jonathan, who had just returned from serving in the war in Iraq, looked remote and insular, as men often do who have seen terrible things. Hallie's bridesmaid also looked a bit insular, standing close together, stealing the show as they swayed back and forth on their long, stem-like legs. Now, Jonathan and his best man had moved out of the foyer. The wedding party that was left behind sorted themselves into two lines, the bridesmaid on one, the arms on the West Point men, the members of the family in the other. The ritual was about to begin, and the sense of excitement grew as the organist struck up the chords of the wedding march from Lohengrin. The camera's eye that had followed the groom now zoomed back up the aisle to where the bride had just appeared on her father's arm. She was no longer the gawky little tomboy I once knew when she was a child, but a Botticelli Venus, who might as well have been spirited down the aisle by the breeze made by two puff-cheeked zephyrs. With a last loving look, Paul released his daughter's arm and took his seat on the pew beside his wife. Hallie now stood by her soon-to-be husband, looking at him with tenderness, while the best man fumbled in his pocket for the ring. Now the pastor, standing above them, opened his Bible and began to read the wedding rites. "Dearly beloved," he intoned, as my eyes drifted down to my lap, where a small, square-cut diamond gleamed on my right hand. It only had a few facets in it, as my father had bought it for my mother during the Great Depression. It was her wedding ring, mounted on a modest platinum band. She wore it for more than 50 years, but after my father died, and when her knuckles had begun to swell, she wanted me to have it. It was hard for her to take it off after so many years, but when she finally put it on my finger, she bent low to kiss it, as if the ring held time itself, time loved, time embraced, time fulfilled, time she was passing on to me. Back on the videotape, I could see that one of Jonathan's trouser legs had begun to tremble as the young couple stumbled through their vows. The shuttle of time was weaving the old marriage tapestry together again, and I whispered a silent prayer that the chaos of war wouldn't tear it apart. When the pastor finally pronounced the couple man and wife, Jonathan bent down to kiss Hallie on the mouth. After that, looking relieved, he took her by her elbow and steered her back up the aisle. Jan stopped, then started the tape again, now alighting in a reception room where candles burned low on round dinner tables, and older couples sat, sipping champagne. Recorded music drew the younger couples out on the dance floor as the sun-drenched voice of the dreadlocked balladeer Bob Marley sang, "No Woman, No Cry." Underneath the beat of Deacon's heart, I felt another beat. It was the talking drums of Africa. Mother was sitting beside me, her eyes sparkling with tears. Jan finally wrapped up the show, but not before running the whole thing back to the beginning again in order to replay it at some future date. With a sigh of relief, I finally pushed Deacon off my lap to stand on tingling limbs. As I did so, I got another glimpse of Skull Creek. It was gathering itself up like a bolt of satin, pouring over the sandbar and into the inland waterway. The tide was at its full. And so it was when you left us, Mother. There were just 5 people in the room. Vincente, your hospice nurse, my husband Maurice, and me, and you lying there in your hospital gown, a curtain drawn between you and your sleeping roommate. Right before you left us, Mother, while your chest still rose and fell, while blood still pumped through that heart of yours that had once nourished mine, I felt what nobody else in the room felt your immaterial soul rise from the bed. Although it was November, a breath of spring rolled through the room, bringing with it a scent of lilacs. It was your time to go at last. No machines, no nurses could stop you now, yet you stood there for an instant, perched on the edge of your windowsill, smiling lovingly at me, before you dropped into the bottomless sea and let the tide bear you away.
This is part of my memoir about the house that I grew up in, but I've called it The Moving Day. June 13th, 1954, my dad, brother Billy, and I sat on the top deck, front seat of a red double-decker bus. Mum was on the same road, sitting on the passenger seat of the moving van, which was transporting all of our worldly possessions. I was nauseous with nerves, which was surprising. I had been looking forward to this move for months, wrapping my books and toys with newspaper and going through the neighborhood announcing that I was moving to a house with a secret doorway. This embarrassed Mum. "Whisht, Catherine," she'd say. "Don't bother folk with these tales." Our new home had 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, living room, sitting room, and large kitchen. Up a narrow staircase were 2 attic bedrooms and the secret doorway, which in fact led to the eaves of the house, and which I was absolutely forbidden to enter lest I fall through the ceiling below. That first evening we had a picnic dinner of fish and chips on the floor of one of the attic bedrooms. The garden was another cause for excitement because previously we had lived in an apartment. The front garden was smaller, fronted by a brick wall with a wooden gate and a path between two lawns. Between the lawns and the house were flower beds where roses grew from spring until late autumn or even Christmas. The back garden was much larger and had the added attraction of several outhouses. 2 rowan trees grew, one in each corner, giving up their bright red berries each summer, and a pear tree overgrown and giving off shade in the summer, but long past the time when the fruit was tasty and sweet. A tall hedge bordered each side of the garden. However, the back hedge was sparse because the garden led to open fields and hills, for our house was on the last street at the back of the town. The back lawn was used as a drying green on wash days and converted to a 9-hole putting green in the summer when my brother and his pals were not tearing it up, playing soccer. I commandeered the largest outhouse for me and friends to use for our secret society. We went down to the penny arcade and made a sign for the door. Green pastures. No boys allowed. The neighboring farmer used the fields for sheep and later cattle. Our family particularly enjoyed the lambing season, watching all the newborn lambs. We were very excited one spring when twin black lambs were born. It was a thrill, after the lambing season was over, to walk down to the farm to watch the sheep being sheared and then dipped, so that the lambs looked bigger than their mothers. And what fun it was to scramble up the hills, aiming for the summit, only to find another hill behind. In April and May, the lower slopes were ablaze with bright yellow color, gorse, and later broom. There were several years when the farmer decided to keep cattle in the backfield. It was not uncommon to see stray cows wander along the street after they breached the fence. Once I was homesick in the front bedroom when I spied 2 cows looking in the window. Closer inspection, I saw that they were standing in the rose beds and had chewed my mother's roses. I called Mom and she went flying out, screaming, "Shoot, beast, get away! Get back where you belong!" On yet another occasion, 6 cows got into the back garden, causing our dog to go mad and chase them, all 6 stampeding through the hole in the back fence. In these days, it was not customary for children to have their own designated bedroom. Typically, my brother and I slept upstairs in the summer, where we very often had visitors, usually aunts, uncles, and cousins. When the weather was cold or if one of us was ill, we slept downstairs in the front room. The sitting room was, of course, used for visitors. However, the family used it most evenings for watching television. It had a beautiful big bay window where the Christmas tree stood. Mother used the living room as an extension to the kitchen. We ate all our meals there. However, there were also 2 easy chairs, one on each side of the fireplace, first coal, then electric, where we relaxed during the day, since we only watched television in the evenings. In pride of place in the living room was Mom's pulley, her pride and joy, which she would never part with. No one else had a pulley in the living room. It was usually relegated to the kitchen or bathroom and collapsed when not in use. Mom's pulley was a permanent fixture, 3 long wooden rods painted white and a strong rope which hoisted the rods up to the ceiling and fixed to the wall with a cleat. Mom was teased mercilessly about her pulley, but she often had the last laugh. When it rained and she was unable to hang the washing in the back garden, she was able to dry the whole load, sheets and all, in the warmth of the living room. The problem with the kitchen was that it had a cement floor and I was accident prone. It was bad enough when I dropped a bottle of milk on the floor, and a catastrophe when I took a large casserole dish of scalloped potatoes out of the oven and smashed the whole thing. Even more drastic was my altercation with the French door which led from the living room to the kitchen. I tripped in the living room and was surprised to find my arm in the kitchen and body still in the living room. I have many fond memories of Shiloh, 49 Alexander Street, Dunoon. In August 2019, when I visited Dunoon, I ran into a neighbor and was happy to learn that a local couple with a young family had moved in. I wonder if they kept the pulley.
My mentor. I have been blessed with many mentors. I chose my first Miss Dolly Peters. I had a mentor before I even knew what a mentor was. Father traveled for his jobs. Sometimes I accompanied Mom and Dad on special trips. A favorite was to Eaglesmere Inn, built in 1887. It was in the middle of a Victorian summer resort, visited by heat-escaping families from Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. On the shores of Eaglesmere Lake, it shared waterfront with summer cottages of the wealthy. Mother and I lounged around or played with the vast supply of sports equipment provided. Father attended his conference, then played golf with his old leather bag and wooden staffed clubs. Now, the real reason I love the hotel, there were no prices on the menu. Dad, I can order anything? Sometimes my parents wanted to be alone. I would be dropped off at my aunt's nearby racehorse farm. I would get stuck with my cousins. No choice of menu there. We did get to play in the half hayloft. When my parents were away longer, I stayed with my grandmother and my grandfather. The year was 1955, and I was in 6th grade at Leonard Grade. Situated halfway up East Market Street Hill, I had attended since 1st grade. Of course, I walked uphill both ways in the snow. Miss Ann Dolly Peters was a teacher at my elementary school. Her father's was Charles, a manager of the largest employer of town, Harbison Walker Refractories. 4 years later, my Nana gave me my first corporate stock in Harbison Walker. We went to the broker. It was Kelly Nevling's grandfather, who had a real ticker tape machine in his office. Miss P lived in a large yellow brick home just up the river from my Nana. The house had a 3-story round tower in one corner. I thought of knights and kings jousting, and hot oil poured down from the 3rd story when I walked by on my way home from downtown. To prepare us for junior high school, we had 4 rotating classrooms. I was in Miss Peters' homeroom, number 11. Back then, the school day started with the Pledge of Allegiance and reading from the Bible. One day I had to read the Bible. I started to see black and blue stars and felt faint. Miss Peters took me into the hall and gave me a pep talk, and I went back and finished. That served me well for my future job. Miss Peters was in charge of the school crossing guards. There were 3 streets to cross to reach the bottom of the hill. My friend Bill Franson and I were equipped with white belts and a silver badge. We made the students wait with our arms outstretched until a group gathered, and then we let them go. I talked to Bill yesterday, friends for 66 years. The Mambo was the hot dance craze in America. Miss P tried to civilize we boys who would prefer to be in the woods with our dog rather than touch a girl. Playing Perry Como in class was not quite the same as Papa Loves Mambo we heard on the Hit Parade TV show. Riding to and from school 4 times a day, we went home for lunch, gave us time to talk. The scourge of teacher's pet crept in. I was not. Riding back and forth was not as bad as having your parents as your teacher or minister. Miss P was a large woman standing over 6 feet tall. No one ever said anything about teacher's pet when she was around. Of the 4 teachers we had, Miss Peters taught music, art, history, and geography. Since our family of 3 traveled a lot, I loved geography. I grew up on the banks of the Susquehanna River and had traveled to the headwaters. I always wanted to go down the river to the Chesapeake Bay and onwards to the Atlantic. I had maps and a globe that lit up inside in my bedroom. Going through my library last month, an old book floated to the top. I thought of my friend, a professor of geography, would enjoy reading a book published in 1897. Opening the book, in the flyleaf, I saw a note from Miss Peters. It was given to me by her in 1955. That prompted my selection of Miss Peters as my first mentor. I forgot about Carpenter's Geographic Reader, but not about Asia. I read books all about sailing in Asia, like the one-legged sailor Tristan Jones. Asian history, Chin Ho, the admiral of the fleet, who traveled around the world in 1421. He built a temple in Malacca I later visited. At the university, I took classes in Chinese and Japanese art history. I helped the wife of the Chinese ambassador to Great Britain in World War II cooking in her home in La Jolla. I cut vegetables, chicken, with a Chinese cleaver. I learned to use chopsticks, ate, and washed dishes. I have visited 9 Asian countries, some several times. The first time 40 years ago. Competitive sailing led me back to 5 of them. My crew earned winning trophies in the Autohelm Regatta in Singapore, the Raja Muda in Malaysia, and the King's Cup in Thailand. I delivered sailboats in Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, and Thailand. I met the Raja Muda of Selangor, the future king of Malaysia. We raced against the king of Denmark. He was only the prince consort, and not even a Dane, he was French. Thanks, Miss Peters, for inspiring my travels around the real globe.
My name is Annie Stein. I live in Bay Breeze. My story today is not a story at all. It's a letter to my friend. He has been my friend for over 60 years. And as we progress through my reading, I think you will understand more about our relationship. So here goes. Dear Milt, I do not need to tell you, my friend, that these are troubled times. Times that I think may finally be the final straw that so burdens this country that we cannot stand. We have lived through hard times before where civil unrest and riots tore communities apart. But these times are different. As a psychiatrist, you understand that stress can lead to violence so egregious that coming back to normal is impossible. Coupled with the threat of the virus, unemployment, political unrest, and the ennui that grips so many of our young, I fear a path does not exist to guide us to the promise of a brighter future. For a moment, please let me dwell on happier times. Remember the day we met? I certainly do remember that day, the time, the place, and the activities in which I was engaged. It was my first day back to work at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York from a vacation. I was the manager of the nursing department for the Department of Psychiatry. As I sat at my desk, reviewing tasks that had been accomplished while I was gone, those that remained, the telephone rang. I didn't want to answer it. I knew that the voice on the other end would add to the to-do list that was already too long. To my delight, my chief resident was on the phone asking me to come to his office to meet the new crop of residents that would be with us for a year. There were 4 of you, all bright-eyed and eager to show good manners. You all rose from your seats when I entered the room. The chief resident, Bruce, and I smiled at each other. I think we were thinking, how long will this goodwill last? When I turned to take a look at the new residents, I saw 3 white faces and 1 brown face. The brown face and its body stood slightly away from the other 3, with a face marked by no expression whatsoever. Stiff shoulders and legs placed in the prize fighter's position, 1 foot slightly in front of the other. What's his story, I wondered. Why so defensive? As I was introduced to each one, I shook hands, then covered both of our hands with one of mine, looked into their eyes, and said their names. I spoke both names to denote that we were equal, but it also cemented that person within my mind. When your turn came and I treated you the same as everyone else, I noticed you relaxed. I kept wondering what the issue might be. Bruce was a wise man and knew how to handle the situation. I will take 2 of the new guys and give a unit tour. Annie, why don't you take Milt and 1 other? That way we will be less like an invading army. I noticed a small smile appeared on your face. Or was it a sign of resignation that you were stuck with me? And then it hit me. It was the 60s. Milt was black. I was white. Added to my list of crimes with a southern accent that clearly advertised my origin. A wave of anger coursed through my body. Could that man be judging me without knowing anything about me, I wondered. As time went on, we danced around each other, both polite to a fault, always professional. The other residents and I formed an easy working relationship, frequently blowing off steam at the local watering hole. Not so with you. Until one magic day when you knocked on my office door, entered, and stopped dead in your tracks. Is that Coltrane on the radio, you ask? He touches my soul when he plays Body and Soul, I replied. Nah, Liberia is his best, you argued. You were no longer the distant professional, but a warm, happy person. As we talked, we spoke of how we would have loved to have visited Harlem during the Jazz Age, listened to Lady Day, and take the A train. We who had circled each other for a month was finally talking. What a joy it was to work with you. You were one of the most caring human beings I have ever had the honor of working with, and watching you interact with broken souls, helping them on their way back to health. We ate lunch together as often as our schedule allowed. As a joke, we would bump shoulders as we walked down the hall to the dining room, since there is no telephone exchange more active than a hospital dining room. My future husband and your wife would join us for dinner if you were on call and I had to work late. You asked me to be the godmother of your firstborn. One day a new patient was admitted to the unit. He came to my office and asked to see the black doctor. What black doctor? I asked. The one you were talking to when I was admitted. Oh, do you mean Dr. Haller? By that time I had worked with you for a number of months. When I looked at you, I did not see a black man. I saw my friend Milt, a funny, kind, intelligent, and yes, handsome man. Now, don't let that handsome get to your already overinflated ego. Will we ever reach the day, that nirvana, when we do not see color of skin, but characteristics that make us unique? Why did it take us so long to relax and accept each other at face value? Did I see a competent doctor or a black man? Did I react or treat you differently than the other new residents? Did you automatically assume I was a racist and I would somehow place obstacles in your path that would preclude your success as a psychiatrist? I honestly do not remember. I do remember feeling uncomfortable in your presence. Was it because you were black, or was it because I felt you had put me on notice that you did not trust me? To my deep regret, we never discussed our reactions after we became friends. That is to my regret, and I believe to yours also. We met almost 60 years ago at a time when civil unrest centered on a war that we did not understand. We are at a war today, a war against a virus, and yes, a war with and against each other. We survived the first war. Will we survive this one? Be well. I know you're lonely now that Charlene is no longer with us. Please do not visit her grave as frequently as you have been doing. Spend time with your grandchildren and remind your children that they were not perfect children and that they are not perfect parents. And your granddaughter is not a perfect teenager. No, hold that thought. There is no such thing as a perfect teenager. Thank you for the love, friendship, and the joy of knowing you. Your companionship and support over the years has been one of the greatest joys of my life. Mostly thank you for reinforcing my mother's lesson that each of us has some of the other within us, no matter the color, religion, or nationality. By the way, Body and Soul continues to be Coltrane's best, and don't argue with me. I cannot believe it's been 60 years. To me, it's yesterday. I love you. Be well, be happy, and remember you have done good. You are always in my heart and thoughts. Annie.
Hello, I'm Joy Tobin, and I'm going to read some memories I have of grades 1 through 12 in the public schools. Here I go. As I recall experiences with my teachers in the public schools and their impact on my young life, I am surprised at how much I remember and how I have never forgotten their names. I was called by my first name, Marilyn, from grades 1 through 10. In first grade, I recall our class forming a circle in the activity room where I was handed a jingle shaker by Miss McCracken. I enjoyed the experience of playing my instrument in time to the music. Our family moved to Mount Vernon, Pennsylvania during my first year of school. In my next first grade, I remember exactly where I was sitting when Miss Hill stood beside me and said to the class, "I want all of you to watch Marilyn. She does not move her lips when she reads." I was reading from Dick and Jane, of course, and was pleased to hear her compliment, probably given because I was a new student. In second grade, I liked the bangle bracelets Miss Anderson invariably wore. I sat in the first seat of the second row from the windows. I remember liking the marigolds she set on her desk immediately in front of me. To this day, they are one of my favorite flowers. To the left of her desk was a bulletin board where she had hung my drawing of those marigolds. An unhappy memory, though, when the boy in the front seat of the next row handed me classroom papers from the preceding rows, he mixed them up. Miss Anderson smacked my hands with the ruler because she thought I had made the mistake. In 3rd grade, we moved again to Arnold when I was almost 8. I remember being late for my first day at the new school. Miss Baxter smiled as she welcomed me and became one of my favorite teachers. I sat in the last seat of the second row from the door. I recall her always smiling. She must have liked music because we sang frequently. I can see in my mind's eye the tan music book which held my favorite song, Bobby Shafto. Bobby Shafto's gone to sea, silver buckles on his knee. He'll come back and marry me, pretty Bobby Shafto. He was my hero, and I daydreamed about Bobby Shafto coming home to marry me. In 4th grade, at the back of Miss Gordon's room was a big easel with large sheets of paper. I looked forward all year for my turn at painting with those long brushes and containers of watercolors. I never got my turn. I do remember being praised by Miss Gordon. She asked me to stand and said to the class as she pointed to my shoulder blades, "I want you to notice how Marilyn is so good today she is sprouting angel wings." Afterwards, we students walked down the hall to Miss Donnelly's classroom for geography, where she caught me reading comics behind my great big geography book. My sprouting angel wings must have wilted on the spot. This was the grade where we performed an operetta. Each of the girls wore a pink outfit with a bare midriff. While we waited to go on, I showed my classmates how I could pop out my tummy between the top and the bottom of my costume. I was delighted that no one else in the class could do that. Of course, we sang a song called "I Miss My Swiss Miss Misses Me." I'm not going to sing all of that to you, but another song was "I'm a Reluctant Dragon." I wonder how many of you remember that. I'm a reluctant dragon. What ho, quite so, a very reluctant dragon, and so forth. Now, in 5th grade, Miss Clark assigned me to work on a huge mural of the Battle of Thermopylae, led by Leonidas of Sparta. My hero led the Greeks against the Persians, and the Greeks won. In my mind's eye, I can see that big mural of which I was so proud. I remember that same year getting snowballing with Hillary before we walked into the school building. We were sent to the principal, Miss J. She said to us, "You know you are not permitted to throw snowballs on school property. You tell your parents you have received 5 days of after-school detention." Hillary and I were thoroughly delighted. We were the best of friends and saw it as a reward because we would spend more time together. In health class in 5th grade, I was deeply impressed by Miss Bushnell's warnings about smoking cigarettes, drinking alcohol, and watching out for germs. Years later, I could still not buy cigarettes for my mother, nor drink a glass of wine, nor eat a drink after anybody else without the ghost of Miss Bushnell rising up to haunt me. In 6th grade, I hid in the cloakroom of Miss Cook's class as long as I could because my mother had cut my hair into bangs and I was too embarrassed to go to my seat. In 7th grade, I thoroughly enjoyed Mr. Davis's general music class. He taught us music that remain my favorites to this day. Stephen Collins' Foster songs, the Ash Grove, Saint-Saëns' Danse Macabre, Ferde Groffet's Grand Canyon Suite, among others. One day after class, Mr. Davis asked, "Marilyn, how would you like to play cello in our orchestra?" To my everlasting regret, I rejected his offer because I was ashamed of the habit of biting my nails. In 8th grade, I was fearful of entering Mr. Paletta's English class. He posted strict rules about how we should behave in his classroom. We were required to stand when we asked or answered a question. If we did not stay within the lines of our paper, we received an F for our assignments. Mr. Paletta was gruff and never smiled. We dared not break his rules. In 9th grade, I had missed school 1 week in the fall and did not follow the instructions for my home economics assignment of creating a simple dress. In all my school years, I never received a D on my report card, except for that class. In 10th grade, I loved my plain geometry class and idolized my teacher, Mr. Rosati. I stood up for hours to solve his assignments. I had a straight A average, earning 100% on almost all my tests. In 11th grade, when my parents told me we were moving yet again to our school's rival in football and basketball, I wept. I was comforted when my dad took me in his arms and said, "Joy, if you do not want to stay in your new school after 6 weeks, your mother and I will pay tuition for you to return." I discovered it was fun to be the new girl in the class and would not have returned for anything. 12th grade. There is nothing like writing a paper on a subject to learn about it. I enjoyed learning and writing about Queen Victoria. The English teacher, Miss Taylor, said, "Congratulations, Joy. Your excellent paper qualifies you for being accepted into the National Honor Society." I had never heard of the National Honor Society, but I decided it must be good to be a member. At the same time, I was elected by the student body to reign as the Shamrock Queen for the big winter dance. I'm embarrassed to confess that that election meant more to me than being accepted into the National Honor Society, a reflection of my shallow understanding of what life was all about, even after 12 years of being mentored by mostly very good school teachers.
I wrote this for Mother's Day, May 9th, 2020. Reflections on my mother's love. How do you receive love for and from a mother? How much love can a mother give? How does love reveal itself? My mother was born June 2nd, 1907, 5 years younger than my dad. They were married January 12th, 1929, and 9 months later, October 22nd, 1929, my sister Anne was born. I recall Mother saying that during that time we had lived on 75 cents a day. My father was paid for delivering phone books. There were times when she didn't know where the next meal would come from, but the Lord always provided. Although our rent was not paid for long periods, we were not evicted. After my brother was born, in 1931, they now had all family they wanted, a son and a daughter. Then, an unwanted pregnancy occurred, and on September 18, 1934, I was born. One day while in high school, my father had a little too much to drink and blurted out to me, "You know you were not wanted." I was crushed. So my sister Anne became my little mother. While pulling at my mother's dress to be held and loved, Anne was called to take me away. I was not permitted out of my crib until Anne came and got me. Mother was the fourth child of 7 with red hair and freckles. She became a star basketball player at Beccaria Township High School in Coalport, Pennsylvania, then went on to 2 years of college. Her first love was music. Through playing piano and organ and leading choirs at church. She also taught piano, organ, and theory after school and Saturday in our home. My parents knew I could sing, and at age 5, my dad took me to the tap room at the local bar and sat me on the piano to sing for the patrons. Mother soon put a stop to that, and I began to sing solos in church and different events as I grew older. Mother stood up for all of her 7 children as the family grew. Because of school situations and the antics of my 3 mischievous brothers, Mother would march up to the principal's office or the local chief of police and amend the situation. While in nursing school, I was having difficulty with my studies due to my ADD, attention deficit disorder. I would phone Mother and say, "I'm coming home." Mother would listen, and clearly I would call her saying, "Just stick it out one more month." That always provided sufficient time to reflect and give confidence and assurance to continue. I can never recall my mother hugging, kissing, or holding me. But that was a physical touch. Spiritually, Mother enabled me to become a Christian and presented me my first Bible, provided funds for us to go to summer camp. She also found many opportunities to promote my singing engagements at various organizational events, talent shows, weddings, funerals. All through those growing up years, I continually hoped she would demonstrate physical love to me. Years after her death, my memories and thoughts became more positive, and with gratitude, I grew to love her more and more. After her death, my memories and thoughts became more positive, and with gratitude, I grew to love her more and more for her protection, encouragement, and opportunities to achieve confidence in all accomplishments of life. I appreciated her more as I married and had children. They, by the way, she doted on. I love you more now, Mother, and sense within my spirit a true mother's heart revealed in ways I had overlooked. I love you and miss you, Helen, Christine, Johns, Hammer. But mostly, I miss my mother.